let me start with a truth we don't say out loud often enough. Burnout isn't a sign that a student is lazy, unmotivated, or not cut out for school. Burnout is often a sign that a student is carrying too much academically, emotionally, logistically, without enough support. And today, that's not the exception, it's become the norm. If you're a student listening, you might feel this in your body already. If you're a parent, you may be watching this unfold from the sidelines. And if you're an educator, you're probably seeing it every day with your students. So today I want to have a real talk about the secret sauce for preventing burnout. And it's not grit, pressure, or just pushing through. Because here's the reality. Many students are not just students. They're also employees working 20, 30, sometimes 40 hours a week. They may be caregivers for siblings, grandparents, or parents. They may be first-generation students navigating invisible systems alone. They may be students managing anxiety, ADHD, learning differences, or chronic stress. And young adults trying to be financially responsible in a very expensive world. And yet we often design academic systems as if school is the only thing they're managing. And that mismatch between expectations and reality is often where burnout begins. Burnout isn't about weakness. It's a schedule designed at 100% capacity with no buffer for being human. And I experienced this myself as a college student. So on a personal note, when I was in college, I held myself to an incredibly high standard, in large part because I was on a full scholarship and afraid to dip down in my grades and potentially lose that scholarship. I was also working 2 or 3 jobs, and I believed that if I just worked harder and slept less, I could handle it all. And I did really well most of the time I did. But there were moments where I felt completely overwhelmed and moments where I was exhausted, stretched thin, and questioning whether I was doing enough or if I was enough. And what I didn't have then was that language for burnout or permission to build systems to protect my energy. And I had achievement, but I didn't have sustainability. And that's what I want for students today. But before we talk about how to prevent burnout in students, I want to pause for a moment and talk about what the term is and where it comes from, because actually it matters more than we realize. It's not a brand new term. It came from a psychologist who lived it. So in the 1970s, a psychologist named Herbert Freudenberger was the first researcher to describe burnout in a clinical sense. And he defined it as profound exhaustion caused by severe chronic stress, especially in people who care deeply and push themselves relentlessly. NPR's Noel King tells this story in an episode called When a Psychologist Succumbed to Stress. He coined the term burnout. And Freudenberger's life gives us critical context. Freudenberger was a Holocaust survivor. His childhood was cut very short. He immigrated to the United States and experienced a really challenging time here, and neglect, spent part of his youth living on the streets. And as an adult, he became intensely driven, almost compulsively, to help others. He ran a successful psychology practice on New York's Upper East Side. And then on top of that, he opened up a free clinic in the Bowery, working with young folks struggling with addiction. He worked 12-hour days and then would go back out and work until 2 a.m. And his daughter later describes how exhausted he became, how stressed, irritable, and depleted he was. And one day when his family was supposed to leave for vacation, he simply couldn't get out of bed. And what's striking is how Freudenberger described his experience. It was not just tiredness. It wasn't depression. It was something else. He noticed that the young people he worked with would sit there holding cigarettes, watching them burn all the way down. And that's where the metaphor came from. They weren't exploding. They weren't breaking down dramatically. They were just burning out. And Freudenberger realized this was happening to him too. And he later said that burnout is a response to stress and frustration, but also to the demands we place on ourselves, especially perfectionism and relentless drive. And this is where I want us to really lean in, because burnout was never about laziness, and it was never about not caring enough. It was always about almost caring too much for too long and without margin, without space. And that matters when we talk about students today, because the students most at risk for burnout are often the ones doing everything right, the high achievers, the helpers, the students balancing school, work, family responsibilities, caregiving, and sometimes unrealistic expectations. And burnout is certainly not a failure of character. It's actually a signal that the load has exceeded the capacity of the system supporting it. And if we don't teach students how to build margin, how to pace, prioritize, and protect their energy, we end up watching the same slow burn play out again and again. Now, I also want to say burnout is not just being tired. I actually often refer to Emily and Amelia Nagoski's work on this because they differentiate between stress and a stressor. And according to them, just because you have dealt with a stressor, that doesn't mean you have to deal with the stress. And they refer to the stress cycle. And burnout is chronic stress without that recovery loop. It's feeling emotionally detached from work or school. It becomes that feeling of losing motivation for things that once mattered. And it's feeling like no matter how hard you try, it's just never enough. And research tells us this matters because burnout actually affects learning and memory. It affects executive functioning. It impacts mental health. And it ultimately can have an effect on retention and persistence in school. So when we talk about preventing burnout, we're not talking about it being soft, we're talking about strategic approaches. So burnout prevention works best when students, parents, and educators play a role. Okay, so I'm going to talk about this from each perspective. Students, this part's for you. Burnout starts with systems, not self-criticism. I know this can be hard for perfectionists. Trust me, I know. Do a weekly reality check. Ask yourself, what do I actually have the capacity for this week? Okay. Build a non-negotiable baseline: sleep, meals, movement, even short ones. And use external supports, calendars, reminders, checklists. These are tools, not crutches. I schedule in when I'm going to work out. I schedule in my walks. These are all important. Nagoski also offer some simple things you can do. Physical activity is one of them. It's actually a way of completing the stress cycle response the most efficiently. So it could mean jumping up and down, releasing a good cry. They even say things like a 20-second hug, or laughing with friends, or creative self-expression can help you move through that emotional stress response. And what I really love, this is a big one, I'm going to say it twice, is they use the term wellness not as a state of being, but a state of action. Wellness is a state of action. Now, you don't need to do everything perfectly, but you need systems that work with your life, not against it. And I recommend this to my students when I work with them each week. Schedule your downtime. Schedule your moments to decompress. Okay, when I work with my students, I schedule this. When is your downtime? Okay, now parents, normalize stress, okay, without normalizing burnout. So ask questions like, what feels heavy right now? Or where do you need support or pressure? Model how you manage stress in a healthy way, and help students prioritize what they need to do. Reinforce that rest and regulation are part of success, not rewards for success. And your calm, steady presence matters more than constant problem solving. Model it. Now, educators, this is where systems matter most. Make expectations visible instead of assumed. Sometimes, I've assumed that my students understood what I was saying, and they didn't. Build in interim deadlines and check-ins. I did this a lot, and the check-ins could be by email. And the interim check-ins were sometimes visual graphic models as well to show my students, here's where we are in the process. Burnout prevention is not about lowering standards. It's about designing pathways that make learning possible. And at its core, preventing burnout is about connection. And I talk about connection a lot. It's the cornerstone of my book. So it's connection to set realistic expectations, to set supportive systems, to have open communication, and to understand that students are whole people, not just producers of work. So my framework that is in my upcoming book, the Connect Framework, focuses on organization, communication, engagement, and transition skills, because these are all systems that need to be in place for sustainable productivity and learning to take place. And so if you take one thing away from today, let it be this: burnout is not a personal failure. It is a systems signal. And when we listen to that signal together, we create environments where students don't just survive, they thrive. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.